Why did people in the Victorian era sleep worse than we do today? There are many reasons, and you will definitely be shocked by some of them. We tend to romanticize the Victorian era, imagining elegant ladies in crinolines and gentlemen in top hats. We think that their lives, devoid of blue light from screens and constant information noise, were more peaceful and measured. But what if I told you that nighttime for a Victorian was not a time of rest, but a real battlefield for a few hours of oblivion? Their sleep was fragile and intermittent, and it had far more enemies than ours does today. It was an era when silence was a luxury, warmth was a privilege, and darkness hid not peace but fear. They fell asleep to the roar of factories and woke up to bone-chilling cold in a world where the night itself was filled with anxiety. In this video, we will visit the bedrooms of the Victorian era to understand why their inhabitants slept much worse than we do. We will examine three main reasons: the relentless noise of the Industrial Revolution, the piercing cold of their homes, and the constant fear of disease that poisoned even the night hours. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn why nightmares for a Victorian woman began long before she closed her eyes. What if I told you that everything you believed about sleep in the past was untrue? You often hear about the theory of so-called segmented sleep among Victorians, which is presented as the lost wisdom of our ancestors. Supposedly, they slept twice a night, and in between the first and second sleep, they indulged in reflection, reading, or conversation. It sounds romantic, but in reality, this practice was not a choice, but a necessity. It was easy to wake up in the middle of the night when the bed was hard and the room was freezing cold. This awakening was not for philosophical conversations, but to throw some wood on the fire or wrap up warmer. Imagine a bed of that time. Often it was just a mattress stuffed with straw or horsehair. Over time, the filling would clump together, forming lumps and hollows, turning rest into an ordeal. High-quality spring mattresses were only available to the wealthiest segments of the population. For most people, beds were far from what we consider comfortable today. It was common to wake up with a hard lump of straw digging into your side. Therefore, the first sleep often ended simply because of physical discomfort. The interval between sleep was used for the most mundane tasks. It was necessary to go to the chamber pot, which stood in a cold room, or to check that the fire in the hearth had not gone out. For many, this was the only time when they could enjoy relative silence. The idea that all Victorians read by candlelight during this nighttime break is also an exaggeration. Candles and lamp oil were expensive, and burning them without a particular need was an unaffordable luxury for most families. Often, this hour was spent in complete darkness. For women, this time was not a rest either. They had to check on the sleeping children, calm those who woke up, or do small handicrafts by dim light if it was absolutely necessary. There was no question of peaceful contemplation. Thus, 2 sleeps was not a wise practice, but rather an adaptation to extremely uncomfortable conditions. People simply could not sleep through the night without interruption because of the cold and uncomfortable beds. Their sleep was shallow and interrupted by definition. This forced habit does not speak of harmony with nature, but of a constant struggle for basic comfort. Their bodies simply could not fully relax in such conditions. Waking up was not a pleasant pause, but another reminder of the harshness of everyday life. Do you think you could adapt to such intermittent sleep? Share your opinion in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about the real soundtrack of the Victorian night? If you think that cities were quiet before the advent of cars, you are deeply mistaken. The Industrial Revolution brought with it a deafening cacophony of sounds that never stopped, day or night. For millions of people living in industrial cities such as Manchester or London, silence became an unattainable dream. Factories and mills smoked around the clock near their homes. The rhythmic pounding of steam hammers and the screeching of machine tools penetrated thin walls and single window frames. Imagine trying to sleep to the incessant clanging of metal. This monotonous but pervasive noise was a constant backdrop to life. It prevented the brain from completely switching off and falling into a deep sleep. In addition to the factories, trains rumbled through the night. Railroads ran right through residential neighborhoods, and the clanging of wheels, hissing of steam, and piercing whistles of locomotives woke residents several times a night. Houses literally shook when another freight train passed by. The streets were not quiet either. The stone-paved roads amplified the clatter of hooves and the rumbling of carts delivering goods for the morning markets. Even at night, city life did not come to a complete standstill, and every sound echoed through the narrow streets. In port cities, the sounds of ship horns and the shouts of dock workers were added to this. Work in the docks often went on in several shifts, and nighttime activity was the norm. For residents of coastal areas, this was another source of constant anxiety. For women whose hearing is often more sensitive, this noise was a real torture. They could not sleep, listening to every sound from the street, worrying about the safety of their homes. The constant background noise kept the nervous system on edge. Unlike us, Victorians did not have double-glazed windows or soundproofing materials. Their homes were virtually defenseless against city noise. The only salvation was thick curtains, but even they could not stop the low-frequency hum of factories. This acoustic chaos led to chronic sleep deprivation. People woke up in the morning, not rested, but exhausted and tired. Their sleep was shallow and constantly interrupted by external stimuli. But what if I told you that the main enemy of sleep was not the roar of machines, but a quiet and ruthless mechanism that appeared in every home? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Victorian era, which changed not only work, but sleep itself. Before the Industrial Revolution, people's lives were governed by the natural cycles of the sun and the seasons. But with the advent of factories, everything changed, and the main dictator was no longer the boss, but the ordinary clock. Mass production made watches accessible to many. They ceased to be a luxury item and became an instrument of control. Now life was measured not by sunrises and sunsets, but by minutes and hours. It was during the Victorian era that the concept of a strict working day took hold. The factory whistle at 6 in the morning became a merciless alarm clock for entire neighborhoods. Being late for work was punishable by fines or dismissal, so the fear of oversleeping was a constant companion of the working man. This gave rise to a new phenomenon: pre-sleep anxiety. People went to bed not with thoughts of rest, but with worries about whether they would be able to wake up on time. This stress itself prevented them from falling asleep, creating a vicious circle. A whole profession emerged in the knocker-up, or human alarm clock. These people walked the streets in the morning and knocked on windows with long sticks to wake up the workers. The very existence of such a profession speaks to how great the fear of oversleeping was. For women, the tyranny of time was twofold. They had to get up long before their husbands to light the fire, make breakfast, and get them ready for work. Their own sleep was sacrificed to the family schedule. The concept of 8 hours of sleep, which we consider the norm today, was an unattainable luxury for them. People slept as much as the interval between the end of work and the morning whistle allowed. Often it was only 5 or 6 hours. Artificial lighting, gas lamps in the streets and kerosene lamps in homes further disrupted natural rhythms. Now it was possible to work and stay awake longer, pushing back bedtime. But the time to get up remained unchanged. Thus, time went from being man's ally to his overseer. The rhythmic ticking of the clock in the silence of the night was not a soothing sound, but a constant reminder of how little time was left for rest. It was psychological pressure that did not stop even at night. The Industrial Revolution did not just create noise. It robbed people of their natural right to sleep, subjecting it to the relentless rhythm of machines and schedules. What I am about to show you was in every home, but it brought suffering rather than comfort. We are used to central heating and take warmth in the home for granted. For Victorians, however, night was an annual battle with the bitter cold, which they most often lost. Most Victorian houses had no insulation. Single-pane windows let in the cold, and drafts constantly blew in from under the doors and through cracks in the floor. The heat from the daytime fireplace dissipated almost instantly. Fireplaces in bedrooms were not lit at night. It was too expensive, and more importantly, deadly dangerous due to the risk of fire or carbon monoxide poisoning. Therefore, people went to bed in rooms where the temperature was not much different from the outside. In winter, you could see your own breath in the bedroom, and frost formed on the inside of the window panes. It was incredibly difficult to fall asleep in such conditions. Instead of resting, the body spent all its energy trying to keep warm. To warm the bed at least a little, special heaters were used. These were metal or ceramic vessels that were filled with hot coals or boiling water and placed under the blanket before bedtime. But the heat from them was short-lived, and by the middle of the night, the bed was freezing again. People slept in several layers of clothing, wearing nightgowns, stockings, and even special nightcaps. The nightcap was necessary because most of the heat escapes through the head, but even this did not always save them from the piercing cold. Beds often had canopies and heavy curtains. This was not so much for decoration as for practical necessity. The thick fabric retained heat and protected against drafts, creating a small, slightly warmer space around the sleeper. For women, especially those from poor families, the cold was an even bigger problem. They often gave the best blankets to their husbands as the main breadwinners and covered themselves with whatever they could find. Their sleep was even more restless. Constant exposure to the cold not only interfered with sleep, but also weakened the immune system, making people more susceptible to disease. The cold was not just a discomfort, but a real threat to health. Sleep in such conditions did not restore strength, but took it away. But even if one managed to keep warm, another challenge awaited. In the next chapter, you will learn why the bed itself was a source of torment. The comfort we are accustomed to is a product of the 20th century. For Victorians, the bed was a place that only vaguely resembled modern orthopedic mattresses. Often, it was a source of additional irritation rather than rest. Most beds were not based on springs, but on interwoven ropes or straps on which a mattress was placed. Over time, these ropes stretched and sagged, creating a hammock effect. Sleeping on such a surface was extremely uncomfortable and caused back and neck pain. Mattresses for the poor and middle class were stuffed with the most affordable materials. Most often, this was straw, which quickly clumped together, became stiff, and began to poke through the fabric. Such a mattress had to be shaken regularly, but this only helped for a short time. Wealthier people could afford mattresses stuffed with horsehair, wool, or cotton. However, these materials also clumped together over time. Every night, people had to find a flat spot on the mattress to get some sleep. Spring mattresses, although invented in the middle of the century, remained an expensive luxury until the end of the century. Most people never slept on them. Their idea of a comfortable bed was completely different. Pillows were also stuffed with whatever was available. At best, it was down or feathers, but more often it was the same wool or even scraps of fabric. They quickly lost their shape and did not provide adequate support for the head and neck. Bed linen, made of coarse linen or cotton, was rough to the touch. It did not become softer even after numerous washings. For people with sensitive skin, this was another source of irritation. For women, keeping the beds in order was another difficult task. They had to regularly take heavy mattresses outside to air them out and shake them. It was hard physical work. In such conditions, the body could not completely relax. The muscles remained tense and sleep was shallow. People woke up feeling stiff and sore all over. Constant physical discomfort was one of the main reasons why Victorians could not enjoy long, deep sleep. Their bed was not an oasis of peace, but simply a place where they could spend the night in a horizontal position. Ready to learn about the thing that scared Victorians more than robbers and fires? In a world without antibiotics and mass vaccination, disease was a constant and inevitable threat. This fear did not disappear with the onset of darkness, but rather intensified, turning the night into an anxious wait. Epidemics of cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, and diphtheria claimed thousands of lives. Disease could strike any home, regardless of social status. At night, in the silence, every cough, whether your own or your neighbor's, seemed like an ominous omen. The thin walls of the houses did not hide the sounds of other people's suffering. Families could hear someone in the neighboring apartment suffering from fever or coughing. These sounds were a constant reminder of the fragility of life and kept them awake. Tuberculosis, or consumption, was one of the leading causes of death. The characteristic nighttime cough of the sick was well known to all city dwellers. Hearing it nearby meant that danger was very close. The cities were overcrowded and sanitary conditions were appalling. This created the perfect environment for the spread of infection. People understood that they were living in constant danger, and this awareness gave rise to chronic anxiety. For women, this fear was particularly strong. They were the guardians of the hearth and home, and responsible for the health of their families. At night, they listened to their loved ones breathing, afraid to hear the first signs of illness. Any symptom, a slight discomfort, a rise in temperature, was perceived as a potential death sentence. It was impossible to simply sleep on it. Anxiety kept them tense, preventing them from falling asleep. Smell also played a role. The smell of carbolic acid, which was used for disinfection, was strongly associated with hospitals and illness. If this smell appeared on the street, it meant that trouble was somewhere nearby. This constant psychological pressure did not allow the nervous system to relax. Even if a person managed to fall asleep, their sleep was restless, full of disturbing dreams. In the morning, they woke up mentally exhausted. Do you think it is possible to find peace when the very atmosphere around you is saturated with fear? In the next chapter, we will learn how what Victorians ate and drank further exacerbated their sleep problems. The average Victorian's diet was far from what we consider healthy today. It was designed to provide maximum energy for hard physical labor, but it did not promote restful sleep. The evening meal often became another enemy of a good night's rest. The diet was based on heavy and fatty foods. Potatoes, bread, cheap fatty meat, and thick gravies were all difficult to digest. A late and heavy dinner forced the digestive system to work all night, which prevented deep sleep. Fresh vegetables and fruits were seasonal and quite expensive. In winter, the diet became particularly meager and monotonous. A lack of vitamins and minerals could also negatively affect sleep quality. The Victorian era saw a real boom in tea and coffee consumption. These caffeinated beverages became available to the general population. A cup of strong tea in the evening was commonplace, but it also prevented many people from falling asleep. For the poorest segments of the population, cheap gin became a way to forget the hardships of life. It created the illusion of warmth and calm, but in fact destroyed the structure of sleep. Sleep after alcohol became superficial and intermittent. Women who spent all day at home often snacked on whatever was at hand. This could be bread with lard or sweet pastries. Such a diet led to fluctuations in blood sugar levels, which could also cause nighttime awakenings. Digestive problems such as heartburn or bloating were common. In the absence of effective medicines, these unpleasant sensations could torment a person for hours, preventing them from falling asleep. Food preparation hygiene also left much to be desired, leading to frequent cases of food poisoning. Clean drinking water was a problem. So many people drank beer or ale, even in the evening. Although the alcohol content was low, regular consumption still affected the quality of rest. It was a vicious circle. Fatigue led to the use of stimulants, which interfered with sleep. Thus, the Victorian diet was another factor working against them. Heavy food and drinks containing caffeine and alcohol prevented the body from fully recovering overnight. While men suffered from factory noise and the tyranny of the clock, women had another special enemy of sleep, their gender role. Victorian society placed all responsibility for the home and family on women, leaving them no right to rest. Their work began at dawn and did not end even when night fell. A housewife's day was filled with exhausting physical labor: washing, ironing, cooking, cleaning. All this was done by hand, without any household appliances. By evening, a woman was completely exhausted, but even that did not guarantee her a good night's sleep. Even at night, she remained on duty. A woman had to be ready to wake up at any moment to calm a crying child, take care of a sick person, or simply bring her husband a glass of water. Her sleep was not her personal time, but a resource that belonged to the whole family. Physical discomfort exacerbated the situation. Even after taking off their dresses, many women did not completely get rid of their constricting underwear. The corsets they wore all day deformed their internal organs and made breathing difficult, which also affected their night's rest. Society demanded that women be submissive and always available to their husbands. They had no right to refuse marital intimacy, even if they were ill or exhausted. This deprived them of any sense of control over their own bodies and personal space, even in bed. The psychological pressure was enormous. Women bore the burden of responsibility for everything that happened in the home. Any failure, from a burnt dinner to illness, was perceived as her personal failure, causing constant anxiety. Women had virtually no personal time or space for privacy. The bedroom, which was supposed to be a place of rest, was often shared by several family members. Peace and quiet were an unattainable luxury. Chronic sleep deprivation and exhaustion were considered normal for women. Their complaints of fatigue were often ignored or dismissed as female weakness. They were expected to bear their cross in silence, sacrificing their health for the well-being of their families. Thus, for Victorian women, the bedroom was not a fortress, but simply another workplace. Her sleep was intermittent, short, and did not bring true rest. She was the most disenfranchised and most exhausted inhabitant of the Victorian home. When a woman driven to extremes by chronic sleep deprivation and anxiety did seek medical help, a new ordeal awaited her. Victorian medicine, dominated by men, was often deaf to women's complaints. Any symptoms, from insomnia to irritability, were easily attributed to a mysterious diagnosis: female hysteria. It was believed that this disease stemmed from the very nature of women and their reproductive systems. Instead of looking for the real causes, overwork, stress, uncomfortable conditions, doctors saw the problem in the patient herself. It was a convenient way to dismiss her suffering. The treatment for hysteria matched the diagnosis. It ranged from prescribing complete rest, which was impossible for most women, to extremely dubious procedures. Sometimes cold baths or diets were prescribed, which only further weakened an already exhausted body. In an attempt to fall asleep, many resorted to sleeping pills, which at that time were sold freely without a prescription. These mixtures often contained dangerous substances. Their composition was a veritable poisonous cocktail. One of the most popular ingredients was laudanum, an alcohol tincture of opium. It really helped you fall asleep, but it was highly addictive. Many women who started taking it for insomnia became addicted without realizing it. Other sedative syrups contain chloroform, bromine, or even morphine. These substances did not treat the cause of insomnia, but only roughly shut down consciousness. Sleep induced by such drugs was not healthy or restorative. The consequences of such treatment were dire. Women suffered from side effects, their health deteriorated, and their sleep problems persisted. They were caught in a trap. They could no longer fall asleep without sleeping pills, but with them, they only felt worse. Doctors rarely explained the dangers of these drugs to women. Patients were simply expected to trust the authority of their doctor. As a result, thousands of women paid for a few hours of artificial oblivion with their health and their lives. This vicious circle of misunderstanding, dangerous drugs, and public condemnation made women's situation even more desperate. Their struggle for sleep was lonely and often lost in advance. They were victims not only of poor conditions, but also of ignorant and biased medicine. The last but not least enemy of Victorian sleep was invisible but pervasive. It was the very air that the inhabitants of industrial cities breathed. It was so polluted that it made every breath difficult and the night suffocating. Millions of coal stoves in homes and factories emitted tons of soot and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. In calm weather, cities were enveloped in a thick, yellow-black fog known as smog. It penetrated everywhere, even into closed rooms. This smog irritated the eyes, nose, and throat. At night, it triggered coughing fits and made breathing difficult, especially for people with asthma or bronchitis. It was impossible to sleep peacefully when your lungs were fighting for every breath of air. In the morning, you could often find a thin layer of black soot on your pillow that had seeped through the window cracks. People breathed in this filth all night long. This led to chronic respiratory diseases and general weakening of the body. Industrial pollution was compounded by the stench from the lack of proper sewage systems. Waste was often dumped directly onto the streets or into nearby rivers. In the summer, the stench became unbearable. The smell from slaughterhouses, tanneries, and gas plants, which were often located within the city limits, also polluted the air. All these smells mixed into a single stench from which there was no escape. At night, when other irritants subsided, the sense of smell became more acute, and these smells were particularly strong. For women who spent most of their time indoors, air quality was critically important. They had to constantly fight against the soot and dust that settled on all surfaces. But it was impossible to hide from the air itself. In such conditions, sleep could not be deep and refreshing. The body did not receive enough oxygen. People woke up with headaches and feelings of fatigue, even if they managed to sleep for several hours at a time. Thus, even with their eyes closed, Victorians continued to feel the harmful effects of the industrial city. Polluted air was the final touch in the picture of their restless night. It deprived them of the most essential thing for life, the ability to breathe freely. We lifted the curtain on the Victorian bedroom and saw that behind the beautiful facade of the era lay a harsh reality. The noise of factories, cold rooms, fear of disease, difficult living conditions, and the oppressed status of women all turned nighttime from a time of rest into another ordeal. Their sleep was shallow, intermittent, and did not bring true restoration. The history of Victorian sleep is a reminder of how much our environment and social conditions influence such a seemingly basic need. It is also a reason to appreciate the benefits of civilization, silence, warmth, clean air, and medicine that we take for granted today. Their struggle for sleep was part of their struggle for survival. What other topics from everyday life or hidden aspects of the past would you like to see on our channel? Share your ideas in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigations.